I have 35 years working as a truck driver, and in that time I have seen and experienced many things. The road is an endless source of stories to tell. However, the most chilling story that has happened to me on the road to this day, paradoxically did not happen to me while I was doing my job, but when I was driving home from a family trip. Because of my job, I spend the whole year traveling all over the country dispatching goods. However, this was a different trip. This time I was returning from a vacation at the beach with my wife and 2 children. It was a wonderful and well-deserved vacation after a hard year of work. But as the good things are short-lived, as the saying goes, it was time to go home. So that day we got up early, gathered our things, packed our bags, said goodbye to all the staff of the small hotel where we stayed, as they treated us wonderfully, got into our van, and started the trip back home. From the city where we live to the coastal area where we spent our vacation, it is about 14 hours by road, a little more considering that we like to stop in the small towns and tourist places to take pictures and buy souvenirs on the road. That day it was already around 10 o'clock at night when I was driving on the interstate, and we were passing near a farming town, when suddenly, I saw in the rearview mirror the lights of a car coming at very high speed and seemed to be coming straight towards us. I could barely react and move to the side. I almost ran off the road to avoid it when it passed like an arrow, almost millimeters away from my truck. My wife screamed with fright because it was very close to hitting us, but fortunately, thanks to all my years of experience behind the wheel, I was able to maneuver the car correctly and prevent that madman from ramming us. Unfortunately, it was so fast that I couldn't see the license plate of the vehicle, but I did see that it was a blue Silverado pickup truck. After that, I stopped the car and asked my children who were in the back seat if they were okay. They were also a little scared, but they answered me yes, so after a few minutes I got going again. However, a few kilometers ahead, we saw that there was a big traffic jam. There were many cars stopped with their flashing lights on, so I knew something had happened. I parked the car to the side, told my wife and kids to wait inside the truck, and went to see what was going on. I made my way through the cars and quickly saw that a few meters ahead were the reason for the traffic jam. As I got close enough, I could see that the same Silverado pickup that had hit me a while ago was about 20 meters off the road in a twisted heap of iron. Apparently, it had overturned, something that surprised me considering the speed at which it was coming, and near it, there was a body covered with a grenade or a towel. But then I turned my eyes and saw that further down the road was another overturned car. This was a black Ford Focus, and very close to where this car was, or what was left of it, there were also 4 bodies covered with blankets, probably of some of the people who were there, because the authorities had not yet arrived to make the recovery. When I got a little closer to the Focus that was about 10 meters ahead, I realized that inside that pile of twisted iron, there was what appeared to be a small foot. I moved a little closer to make sure of what I had seen, and yes, it was indeed a foot. The foot of a child. There was a child still trapped inside the car. I immediately called some of the drivers who were around and told them what I had seen. Then several men came and we started to move the debris to get the little boy out of the car in the hope that he might still be alive. Although due to the state the car was in, this was very unlikely, but we still had to get him out. One of the volunteers who was helping to get the little boy out told us that he had seen the crash, and according to what he told us, the driver of the Silverado, who was apparently coming fast, lost control of the truck and took the black Focus, where a whole family was driving, which until then was believed to be 4 people, none of whom survived the impact. But now we knew that in reality, there were 5 people in that vehicle, and that perhaps this child had been luckier. Among all the volunteers, we managed to get the little boy out of the pile of iron, but it was then that we realized that it was not a boy but a girl, a little girl of about 5 years old, who unfortunately did not survive the accident either. As we laid the little girl down next to the rest of her family, I felt a huge pang in my heart, As a father, I could not help but feel sorry for that family, which could have been my own, had I not been able to react quickly. I approached the little girl, a beautiful girl who reminded me of my own daughter when I was her age, and with a deep, paternal feeling, I ran my hand through her long, dark hair and caressed her cheek. I could not help shedding a couple of tears as I felt deeply moved and very helpless at that moment. After that, I looked up and saw an ambulance and a police car approaching. In this case, it was just a matter of lifting the bodies because no one survived the accident, and this made me think once again how close my family and I were to being the victims of that night. When I saw the paramedics approaching, I left the scene and returned to my truck with my family. They asked me what had happened, and I told them everything that had happened. Then both my wife and my children were very shocked, probably thinking the same as me. It could have been us. We waited in the car while the authorities took charge of the accident, and after a while we saw that the ambulance left the place, followed by the patrol car, and only a few land traffic agents were left to clear the crash, so the road was cleared and we could move forward. As expected, the atmosphere changed radically. Before the incident, we were listening to music, singing, making jokes. But from then on, we were all in complete silence. All the way home, I could not get the image of that little girl out of my mind. I really felt very sad. It broke my heart to think of her and her family. I could not stop imagining that maybe it was a family that came from a trip like us, that a few seconds before they were also laughing, making jokes and plans for the future. Thinking about that really affected me a lot. We arrived home, still in silence. My children, Javier and Amanda, 16 and 17 years old, went to their rooms without saying a word. We didn't even take our things out of the car. My wife, who knows me like no one else, started making coffee as soon as we arrived. She knows it helps me calm my nerves and relax a little when I feel as tense as I do now. I went up to my room to take a shower, but I still couldn't stop thinking about that girl. Her image was fixed in my head like a photograph. I got out of the shower and went to the sink to brush my teeth, and at one point I lifted my face to look at myself in the mirror. But when I did, I almost fell over because I jumped so hard. As I looked in the mirror, I saw that the little girl was standing behind me. Instinctively, I turned to look at her, but she was no longer there. I turned my face to the mirror again, but she was no longer there. At that moment, I thought it had been a hallucination due to tiredness. What I didn't know was that this was going to be the beginning of a terrible nightmare. That night, I was so tired that as soon as I put my head on the pillow, I fell into a very deep sleep. However, a while later, I began to have a horrible episode of sleep paralysis. I woke up to the sound of a child's voice humming a song I didn't know. It sounded like a song in English or some other language. Because the child's voice singing it seemed to be babbling nonsense words, like when you hear a song in a language you don't know, and you start singing it as you hear it. Then I opened my eyes and tried to get up, but I couldn't. I looked to one side and saw my wife asleep. Then I looked to the other and could see the clock on my bedside table. It read 3:05 in the morning. Then I kept looking for the sound and looked towards the foot of my bed, and there she was. She was the girl from the accident. She was standing there looking at me from the darkness, humming the song and staring at me. At that moment, I tried to stand up and I couldn't. I tried to turn around, to call my wife, to do something, but I couldn't move. I was completely paralyzed and I couldn't speak either. Then I turned my eyes towards the girl, and I watched in terror as the little girl climbed onto my bed and started to climb up my body. Her body was frozen, and as she advanced, I could feel a horrible shiver run down my back. The little girl kept climbing until she reached the level of my chest and laid her head on it, and just as she did so, I began to feel a very sharp pain in the left side of my chest. Once again, I tried desperately to move and scream, but I couldn't. My voice wouldn't come out, but the worst was yet to come, yet to. From one moment to the next, the little girl's voice began to become more spectral and distorted. Then she lifted her head from my chest and continued to rise until she positioned her face in front of mine. And when I had her face in front of mine, I felt the greatest terror I have ever experienced in my life. His hair fell on both sides of me like a kind of curtain. His face was completely white, an inhuman white. And where his eyes should have been, there were only two empty black pits. At that instant, my breathing stopped. Now I could not move, nor scream, nor breathe, and my chest hurt horribly. Then she came a little closer to my face and sketched a very sinister little smile. There I woke up. When I finally came out of that state, I took a huge breath of air and began to breathe sharply, because my breathing had really stopped. Then my wife woke up and, seeing me in that state, asked me what was wrong, but there was no way to explain that. At that moment, I instantly realized something else. I still had a stabbing pain on the left side of my chest. I put my hands there and told my wife to call the emergency room as soon as possible because I was having a heart attack. My wife called the emergency room immediately. Fortunately, there is a health center very close to my house, and the ambulance took only a few minutes to arrive. The paramedics assisted me, and after several tests, they concluded that, fortunately, it was not a heart attack. They asked me if I had suffered any stress or traumatic event. I told them that the night before I had witnessed a tragic car accident, and they told me that I may have suffered a panic attack. The doctor prescribed some pills for my nerves, but they did little good. The following nights, that nightmare was repeated over and over again. It was the same nightmare every time. The girl humming the song and climbing up my body. It was terrifying and frightening. But not only that, but she began to appear everywhere, and at any time of the day, I could see her standing in a corner while I had lunch with my family, or at the door of a store, in the cafeteria, everywhere. I didn't want to say anything to my wife so as not to mortify her, but I really felt she was driving me crazy. However, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, the worst happened. A couple of weeks later, I returned to my job as a truck driver and was assigned my first trip. Strangely, the night before I embarked on the trip, I had no nightmares, slept peacefully, and woke up relaxed. Something that had not happened to me since the night of the accident, as it had not happened to me since the day of the accident. Maybe it was just an episode of stress from everything that had happened, so I had my usual morning cup of coffee with my wife, and then I started my truck and left for the company to pick up the cargo I had to deliver to the neighboring state that afternoon. It was a short trip, which I was thankful for, because if everything went quickly, I could return home that evening. Everything went according to plan. It took about 6 hours to get to the unloading site, and the workers took another 3 hours to unload. I realized that I was in good time, and once the job was done, I decided to return to my city to be at home that night. So as soon as they finished unloading, I started my truck again and started back. However, when I was on the way, I decided to turn on the radio to entertain myself, and everything was fine. Until at one point a song started to play that I recognized immediately. It was the same song that the girl hummed when she appeared in my room. At that moment, I began to feel a shiver all over my body, the same I felt when she climbed into my bed every night. Then I looked to my side, and there she was in the passenger seat. At that moment, my impression was so great that I turned the steering wheel abruptly, causing the truck to enter the oncoming lane. But I quickly turned my eyes to the front to try to regain control. Then I saw another truck coming from the front, and while trying to avoid it, I went off the road. The truck almost turned over, but once again, my years of experience behind the wheel did its thing, and against all odds, I managed to prevent the truck from overturning, thus saving my own life. At that moment, it was 11 o'clock at night. I jumped out of the truck and began to breathe in quickly, because I felt that all that time I was not breathing. Then I saw that several vehicles had stopped and some drivers approached to see how I was. I told them that I was fine, that everything was under control, but that was far from true. I was losing my mind, and this was dangerous for me and for the others. One of the drivers that stopped was the other truck driver that I almost drove in front of, and another one that coincidentally was also heading to my city. To the first one I apologized, and to the second one I asked him earnestly to escort me. I told him that I was not feeling very well. The good man agreed, and was behind me all the way until I arrived at the company. I thanked him and put myself on standby in case he needed me someday. That night I left the truck at the company, but I didn't go back home. I took a cab and went straight to my parents' house, who didn't live too far from there. I needed to tell someone what was happening to me, and the first person that came to my mind was my dad. He was also a truck driver for most of his life, so when I arrived after having a cup of tea that my mom had lovingly prepared for me, I sat down separately with my dad and told him everything that had happened to me during the last few weeks. My old man listened to me attentively, and when I finished speaking, he remained silent for a moment. He waited for me here and went to his room. Then he came back with something in his hands. It was a pendant that had, as I said, an image of St. Christopher, and on the sides some tiger eye beads. He told me that this scapular was blessed. Also that St. Christopher was the patron saint of all drivers and travelers on the road, while the tiger's eye was used to ward off evil spirits. My dad explained to me that something similar happened to him, and that many drivers have had it happen to them as well. According to my father, when tragic events like that happen, this usually attracts evil entities that feed on pain and fear. And perhaps when I touched the little girl's body with that feeling of wanting to bring her back to life and bring her with me, I opened the door for that specter to hang on me and torment me by usurping her identity. From that day on, I put on the scapular, and I have never taken it off again. That was 10 years ago, and since then I have never seen that figure again, nor have I had nightmares. But that experience will always remain in my memory as the most terrifying thing I have lived in my entire existence. My younger sister had just graduated from high school, and as a graduation present, my mother and I decided to take her on vacation to Puerto Vallarta. In my family, there are only 3 of us since my father passed away when my sister and I were still little, and since then my mother dedicated herself to working and taking care of us. And although she had a few relationships, she never remarried, so we are a family of 3. We were all very excited about this trip and planned it for months. However, we had many setbacks when it was time to leave. First, my sister had misplaced her ID. Then my mom got a cut on her hand while chopping tomatoes for breakfast. And if that wasn't enough of a delay, we had a flat tire almost on the road. And then I realized I didn't have a spare, so I had to take a cab and go buy not 1, but 2 tires, because I couldn't go on such a long trip without a spare. The thing is that we ended up leaving much later than planned. I was the one driving, but I was always afraid of driving on the road at night. But due to the delay, I had to do it, because the hotel room was already booked for that night. So we set off on our way without wasting any more time. However, even though I tried to get as far ahead as I could, night was still falling and we were still quite far from our destination. I looked at the dashboard and realized that I had less than half a tank of gas left. Luckily, the next gas station was less than 20 minutes away, so there was nothing to worry about. But when we got there, it turned out that it was closed, and this did worry me. We started looking on the map on the phone to see where the next gas station was, but there was none nearby. The closest one was a little over 1 hour away, and we were almost out of gas, so we could hardly get there. But then I saw that there was one that was about 30 minutes away. The problem was that we had to turn off the road, as it was in a very small town that was a few miles away. and to get there we had to go into a dirt road. But we had no choice. It was either that or get stranded in the middle of the road without gas and in the middle of the night. I drove a few miles, and we did indeed hit the dirt road on the right. The first thing I noticed was that it looked pretty scary, because it was very dark, it was very narrow, and there were trees on both sides, and we had to go slowly and carefully because the road was made of stones. We all became tense, and how could we not be if we were 3 women alone in a car entering the unknown in the middle of the night? But beyond everything, I began to feel a very intense sense of fear, something I could not explain, as if something very bad was about to happen, and my instinct wasn't wrong. We entered that dirt road and it took forever, but after a few minutes we began to see the lights of the town, but there was still a long way to go. I continued driving slowly and suddenly we began to see in the distance a kind of procession. They were a large group of people dressed in black who walked slowly along the road towards the village, or so it seemed. We thought something strange for the time it was because it looked like a funeral procession. However, I thought that it could be a custom of the people of that place, although to be honest it looked a bit scary. We started to approach slowly, and since we could not see anything beyond the group of people walking ahead, we decided to follow the procession, thinking that it would take us to the town. After all, where else could it go? We followed it for a stretch, but suddenly we saw some lights approaching. These were turning on and off as a kind of warning signal. For a moment I thought it was someone who wanted to overtake me, but there was no way to go faster with the procession ahead of us, so I didn't stop. But then I saw in the rearview mirror that the car, which seemed to be an old pickup truck, stopped. The driver left the lights on, got in front of the truck and started waving his arms at us while moving his head from side to side and seemed to be telling us something. At that moment I decided to stop the car, and then he came running up to where we were, approached my window, and before I could say "Good night, sir," he shouted at me, "What are you doing, girl?" and you, addressing my mom and my sister. "Do you want to die or what the fuck?" I was speechless, but then I told him that I didn't know what he was talking about. Then the man looked at me as if I was crazy and said, "Are you not seeing, or do you really want to throw yourself off the cliff?" I was very puzzled at that moment, but then I looked ahead again and the procession was gone. Neither was the road. I was in the middle of the mountain, and what is more terrifying, a few 5 meters ahead was a huge ravine that was clearly visible. It was so big that it must have been at least 10 meters deep, and when I got out of the car to see it well, I realized that the fall led to a river full of giant stones. I was totally frozen and looked over to where my mom and sister were, and they were as shocked as I was. I looked at the Lord and asked him where the procession was. Then the Lord looked back at me and said, "Which procession? There is no procession here. There are 3 suicides who wanted to throw themselves off a cliff." I was so confused and bewildered that all I did was shake my head. But at that moment I looked behind the Lord's shoulder, and then I asked him where the road was, and he answered me that I had left it about a kilometer back, and that when he saw that I was heading towards this area he began to follow me, because he knew that the only thing that was in this direction was that ravine that overlooked the river and that bordered a good part of the town. He told me that he thought I was lost, but he didn't understand how I hadn't realized that I was driving over a pile of brush, and at the distance I was driving, I should have seen the huge cliff in front of me a long time ago. The man was absolutely right. The lights illuminated everything very well, and it was very easy to see that ravine. Then we told him what had happened to us, and he was very surprised. He told me that he lived in a nearby town and that he always came to this town to get gas. He also told us that he had heard many legends of this place, but he had never heard anything like what we had just told him. After that, he accompanied us to the village. Finally, we went to the station and were able to fill up our gas tank. That night, we decided to pay for an inn and stay there. I didn't dare to go any further, so we left the next day very early, and continued on our way without any further incident. We never knew what had happened that night, and even today I still get chills every time I think about how close we came to suffering a horrible fate, and I will never tire of thanking that Good Samaritan who literally saved our lives. My name is Carlos, and the story I am going to tell you next is the most terrifying thing that marked my life forever, so much so that I still have nightmares about it from time to time. This happened 14 years ago, when I was 22. I started dating a girl named Paula who lived in a small town just outside of the city. This was in a pretty quiet place, but it was pretty secluded and had only one access road. Paula was amazing, and I was very much in love with her, so I didn't mind driving several kilometers to look for her. On one occasion, some cousins came to her house from another state, and Paula asked me the favor of taking them with us to see the city that day. I gladly accepted, and that Saturday I drove to town to pick her and her cousins up and go out for a drive. I arrived at her house as usual, and she and her cousins got into my car, my girlfriend in the passenger seat and her cousins in the back seat. The night progressed very well. After a walk around the city, we went to a well-known discotheque. There we had a few drinks and had a great time. We left the disco at about 3:30 in the morning, a little late, especially considering that the town was almost an hour away from where we were. I had a few drinks on me, so I kept my speed down the whole way. The last thing I wanted was to have an accident. At about 4:20 in the morning, we arrived at the road that led to the entrance of the town. It was quite lonely and dark, nothing surprising, because the only place this dirt road led to was that small town, and at that hour, hardly anyone would be going in or out of there. However, as we were coming in, we saw about 400 meters ahead, a pickup truck coming in the opposite direction and passing us very fast. I didn't recognize the model, but it was new and looked very expensive. I didn't think anything of it, but it caught Paula's attention, since she had never seen that truck in town before. We kept going, and about 200 meters ahead, we saw that there were a few black bags of garbage on the side of the road. As I told you, I was going pretty slow, also because the road was dirt and I didn't want to get the car too dirty. So when we passed by the side, she abruptly told me to stop the car. I stopped in my tracks, but I didn't understand why. Then she told me that one of the bags moved. That surprised me a lot. "What do you mean it moved?" And she insisted that it had indeed moved, and she wanted to get out to see, because she thought that surely they came to vote some little animal, something that unfortunately is not uncommon, as some bad people usually throw their pets away as if they were garbage, and she thought that this was the case. So she almost begged me to let her go to free them. For a moment I hesitated, as it was late and I had to go back. I had work in a few hours. But I was also moved by the situation and thought it was very cruel to go ahead and leave the little dog or whatever was inside the bag there to die. So I took a deep breath, took off my seatbelt and got out of the car to see what was in the bags. Paula did the same, and we both crossed the road. As we approached, we noticed that there was a horrible stench, like rotting meat, and we thought that among the bags maybe there were remains of some dead animal or remains of cattle, since a few kilometers away there was a large cattle area. However, neither of us was ready to discover what was really in those unknown bags. When I arrived, I saw that there were about 5 bags, which were about half of whatever they had inside. Then I asked my girlfriend which of them had moved, and she pointed me to the middle one. I approached and moved it with my foot, not abruptly so as not to hurt the animal that we thought was inside, but it didn't look like there was a dog or anything alive in there. I moved it again with my foot, and then the bag fell off the side. It looked pretty heavy, but seeing that what was inside was not moving, I took out a multi-purpose tool that I always carry with me in my pocket, slid out the small knife inside, and slit the bag to see once and for all what the hell it contained and why it was moving. But when I did it, I could not believe what came out of there. It was a bunch of human parts. Hands, forearms, feet. Paula started screaming in panic and ran as fast as she could towards the car, while my legs failed me and I almost fell face first into the pile of remains. I was so terrified by what I was seeing that I was paralyzed and in shock. I began to hear a ringing in my ears that mingled with the drumming of my heart. That's when one of Paula's cousins grabbed me by the arm and pulled me to the car, yelling at me that we had to get out of there because the people in the van might come back. It was only at that moment that I finally reacted, got into my car, started it up and slammed the gas pedal down, leaving a huge dust bowl behind me. Once we arrived at the house, we told Paula's parents what we had seen, and they called the police. They soon arrived on the scene. It was already dawn by then, and then we had to give statements. We cooperated as much as we could, but asked the officers to keep our identities anonymous, as we did not want whoever had done that monstrosity to be able to identify us in any way. We later learned from the press that the remains found were those of criminals who belonged to a dangerous criminal gang, and that it was apparently a vendetta carried out by a rival gang. Fortunately, everything was cleared up, but after that chilling incident, my girlfriend and I were deeply traumatized, especially by the fact that my girlfriend saw that bag move. Almost every night I had nightmares about what had happened, and at one point this almost cost me my relationship with Paula, because after that I could not pass that road without remembering what had happened that morning. Fortunately, she understood very well because the same thing happened to her. So after a few months, we moved together. Even so, we both attended therapy to cope with the trauma of that frightening event. My name is Anna Maria and I am a pediatrician. Today I am here to tell you about the saddest and at the same time most chilling thing that has ever happened to me. That night I was in the car with my father and my younger brother on my way to a rural town called Las Piedras, a small and humble coastal town where I was going to do some service work together with another group of doctors of different specialties. That same day in the morning, the bus that had been assigned to us had left, but I missed it because I had to attend an emergency at the hospital I work for. So I asked him to take me, and since I had to stay in town and the trip was about 8 hours, I asked my 20-year-old brother to come with us to accompany Dad on the way back. He agreed and came with us. That day I left the hospital at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we spent almost an hour more arranging everything and making sure I had everything I needed. This because I was going to be in that place for 15 days. Thanks to this, we ended up leaving at about 3:00 in the afternoon. This worried me a little because I knew that the night was going to catch us on the road, and I did not like that at all, since a good part of the trip was through dirt roads and in very bad conditions, and I knew that my dad could not see very well in the dark. The only thing that reassured me a little was that there was not much traffic on those sides and that our car had good lights. But beyond everything, the trip was very entertaining. During the way we were chatting, listening to music and making jokes, my dad has a great sense of humor, so it is quite difficult to have a bad time with him. As we left a little late, it soon started to get dark. By the time it was about 10 p.m., we were already passing through the last remaining villages before reaching Las Piedritas. The truth is that the whole area was very beautiful, as there were many picturesque fishing villages. In some stretches, the sea was very close to the road, and for that part, I was very sorry that it was at night, and also that I was against the clock, because the truth is that I would have loved to stop on the side and take the opportunity to take a good swim at the beach. However, soon, we left the road that bordered that part of the coast, and we entered an agricultural area where there were large tracts of land on both sides of the road. And when we had about 15 minutes on that very long road where you literally could not see a house for miles, we saw in the distance a little girl no more than 7 years old who came in the opposite direction driving a bicycle. I remember that at that moment we were all speechless, and my brother said in a mocking tone, the typical ghost girl of the road. But then the car lights dazzled her and she lost control of the bike, falling to the side on the asphalt. Dad immediately pulled the car over, but then we saw the lights of a big truck coming at full speed, and before we could do anything, this huge truck passed over her. I remember all of us screaming in unison and then holding our breath, totally paralyzed as the huge, very long truck drove over the spot where the little girl fell. I was completely horrified and remember feeling a great pain in my chest. In a split second, we all got out of the car and ran to the place where she was. But when we arrived, nothing. There was nothing. No trace of the girl, no trace of the bicycle, just the empty and silent road. We are very puzzled because the lights of our car illuminated the place perfectly. We could even see all that stretch of road and much of the surroundings. But while we were standing there in the middle of nowhere, looking at each other in total shock, we saw a tractor approaching and stopping on the side of the road, right in front of us. The driver got off the tractor. A man in his 40s approached us and said, "Don't look for her, she's not there, she's not real, and neither is the truck." We were still speechless. We did not understand anything of what was happening. Then Dad broke the silence and asked him, "Have you seen her?" The man nodded his head and said, "Once, and almost all the travelers who pass through here have also seen it at least once." "Who is it?" I asked him, and then he motioned for us to follow him. We walked a few meters ahead where there were some bushes. Then he opened the branches a little and pulled up some weeds, and there was revealed a small chapel that had a little plaster angel on top, and inside it, there was a small metal cross surrounded by remains of candles and old flowers that had the name of the girl written on it, and underneath was written the date she was born and the date of her death, which was April 17th, 1997. I must say that this happened to us in the year 2013. That is, by then the little girl was 16 years old when she left this world. The farmer told us that the girl was the daughter of a couple who lived in a small farm that was near there, and always went out to ride her bike in the afternoon like every child. But unfortunately that day she went out to the road, and that was when the terrible accident that we saw happened. Hearing this, I could not help but feel a deep sense of sadness because it broke my heart to think that the soul of that little girl had been trapped in that horrible moment as in a kind of time loop. After this, we said goodbye to the farmer and thanked him for taking the trouble to come and explain everything to us. He told us that it was nothing. He put himself in order in case we came back someday and went on his way, while we did the same, got in the car and continued on our way. But after this incident, logically it was not the same. Since that day, I always include this little girl in my prayers, so that God will help her to finally rest in peace. For 5 years, I have been working in a warehouse that is 2 hours away from my city, so I have to travel every day to get to my job, but also, the roads that I have to cross daily to fulfill my work and bring bread to my family are well known for being a place of great criminal activity, especially at night. That's why I always try to return home as quickly as possible. As soon as I deliver the shift at 5 p.m., I get in my car and set course to my city before the night catches me. I always get home around 7:30. Here at that time it's barely dark, so there's still light on the road. However, there was one night when, thanks to the negligence of a colleague, it was impossible for me to leave early. And not only for me, but for all my other colleagues who had to stay several extra hours at work to solve an operational problem. But without going into details, the fact is that by the time I left, it was already 8 o'clock. There was very little daylight left, and of course it became night in the blink of an eye. I confess that I was quite nervous, because I have a wife and 3 children who depend on me and are waiting for me at home. So when I left the store to the road, I saw that it was 8:50 at night. I could only pray to God and all the saints before entering that dark and dangerous road. Fortunately, that day the moon was clear, so the road was illuminated and there was good traffic. That is, it was not as lonely as usual, probably because it was Saturday. During the first hour on the road, everything was fine. I hadn't seen anything strange, nothing out of the ordinary. On this road, most of the vehicles that pass through are trucks. Since it is an industrial area, this is another reason why it is considered so dangerous, because, besides having many road pirates, there are also many accidents, mostly due to the negligence of the truck drivers. That's why I always try to be cautious. After driving for more than an hour, praying to God that nothing bad would happen, I arrived at a toll booth that is halfway down the road. Every day I go through there to take the highway, as this is the safest way, so as I do every day. But earlier, I stood next to one of the booths. The others seemed not to be working, because they were empty. I lowered the glass to make the payment, but the girl who was standing inside the booth seemed to be very distracted. I spoke to her several times and she did not answer me. This was very strange to me because she did not seem to be doing anything. She was only looking to the front, but no matter how much I said goodnight, she never turned to look at me. At that moment, I thought that maybe she was upset about something, or they were not paying her well and she was there reluctantly, I don't know. But then I saw a man who suddenly leaned out of the window in the last booth, signaling me to go over there, and I put my hand out the window and signaled him that I was coming. Then I turned to where the girl was to tell her that she was rude, but she was not there. This unhinged me for a moment, because the only door in the booth was on the side where I was parked, and if she had gone out that way, I would have seen her. However, I did not pay much attention. I assumed that maybe there was another little door on the other side, and I moved to the last booth where the other employee was, because the truth is that I was worried and in a hurry to get home soon, and I still had a long way to go. I quickly arrived at the other booth where this man was, and the first thing he said to me was, "Excuse me, this booth is the only one that is in operation at this time of day." Then he handed me my ticket. This left me thoughtful, and even though I was in a hurry, I asked him why the booth where that girl was, where I had parked first, was not working. Then he looked at me surprised and asked me which girl. I told him the girl in booth 1, a girl with long red hair. When I gave that description, the man laughed nervously and began to shake his head, as if I had said something that puzzled him a lot. Then he looked at me and asked me if it was true that I had seen that girl there, and I told him very seriously that I had. It was then when the man told me that 2 weeks ago he had 2 co-workers. One of them fit the description I had given him, but that a week ago, a van of a well-known criminal group in the area kidnapped the young woman who worked in that same booth where I parked, and to date nothing was known about her. Because of this, the other young woman had resigned, as she was terrified that the same thing would happen to her. When I heard this, I felt, on the one hand, very sad, because if what I had seen was the spirit of the girl, that meant that she had not escaped alive from those men. But at the same time, the mere thought that I had seen a ghost gave me chills. I thought about it all the way back home because I could not even imagine what her family would be living without having any idea of where she is and keeping the hope that someday she could return home alive. My name is Armando, and I have more than 15 years practicing as a cab driver. And if you are thinking that I must have many interesting stories to tell, let me tell you that you are right. But today's is by far the most terrifying experience that I have had to live, not only in my job, but in my whole life. This happened in 2018. It was an ordinary day. It was just an ordinary day. It was about 11 p.m., and I was ready to go home to rest until the next morning. However, at that moment, my friend Frank called me, asking me to do him the favor of taking him to meet up with a girl he had met on Tinder and with whom he had plans to spend the night. I was pretty tired, so I told him that I was sorry and that I'd better look for another cab driver this time because I was in pieces and I just wanted to sleep. But he insisted, and by the way, he told me that he had just enough money and that he didn't have enough to pay the cab that night. But he promised me that as soon as he got his paycheck, he would pay me double if I wanted. So, in addition to the fact that he would make me lose hours of sleep, it turns out that he was not going to pay me either. What a good deal. In the end, I accepted and took him to the girl's house. She lived in a middle-class neighborhood, which was in a secluded area of the city. I left it there and arranged to pick it up the next morning. By then it was already midnight, a time when I was supposed to be home. However, my night was not over yet, because as I was about to leave the complex, I saw in the rearview mirror a woman standing at the gate of a residence under a tree, and she began to beckon me to come to her. For a moment I thought about ignoring her and continuing on my way, but in the end, I decided to do this last service after all. I had already been scared out of my sleep, so I drove in reverse until I positioned myself next to her. She was a tall, blonde woman in her 40s wearing a short, loose-fitting white dress, which gave the impression of being more like a robe. That caught my attention, as it was quite cold that night and that dress was quite low-cut. This woman sat in the back seat and I adjusted the rear-view mirror to see her. Then she asked me to drive to another residential section that was almost on the other side of the city, which also caught my attention because the trip was about an hour and a half on the highway. This considering that it was midnight and at that time there was not much traffic in the area. But the truth is that we never got to that place. She was very quiet. I tried to make conversation, but when I saw that she only answered me with, "Yes, not yet," I just stopped trying. She was a very pretty woman, and you could tell she had money, but she was a bit disheveled, and although I could not make out well because of the darkness, it seemed that she was not wearing makeup, and the only accessory she had on was a red silk scarf tied around her neck. She kept always looking towards the window, but her gaze was empty. Every now and then the lights of the avenue would slightly illuminate her face and let us see that she had very pretty green eyes, but they seemed lost in nothingness. In view of his lack of receptivity, I decided to turn on the radio and put on some music, as it seemed to me that the ride was going to be longer than expected. However, when I had been on the road for about 20 minutes as we were passing through a wooded area, she out of nowhere asked me to pull over and drive into the woods. I wanted to think it was a joke, but that woman didn't seem like someone who would make those kinds of jokes. She insisted, but still not looking at me, and I stopped, not knowing quite what to do. I was puzzled. We both remained silent for a few minutes, me looking at her through the rearview mirror and her with her eyes fixed on the window, until I decided to break the silence and told her that I could not do that. But it was not that I could not, but that the matter began to scare me. With so many things that happen nowadays, 1,000 scenarios went through my head, that she could be a criminal, a psychopath, or that she had henchmen in the forest waiting for me to traffic people or organs, or what do I know. The thing is that I got really scared. But to my surprise, she just got out of the car without a word and walked into the forest alone, as if nothing happened. I was very puzzled. I didn't understand anything. I confess that for a moment I thought about getting out and following her or bringing her back, but although I am ashamed to admit it, cowardice won me over, and I just turned around to go back the way I came, and while I was doing it, the car lights focused on the part of the forest where she had gone, but she was gone. I even tried to see through the trees, but there was nothing. It was as if she had been swallowed by the earth. Finally, I turned around and went back, but I was left with the feeling that something was not right in all this, and it was also bizarre that it even seemed that I had imagined it. The next day I went to look for my friend. But I didn't want to tell him what happened. In fact, I didn't tell anyone, because now I was doubting even my own sanity. A few days passed, and the image of that woman would not leave my head. I thought about her and what had happened day and night, trying to find some logic or an explanation, but I could not find it. However, a little over a week later, all the answers came in the most unexpected way possible. That day, I left for work early as usual and stopped by the coffee shop to buy coffee and the newspaper, and it was there when I got the biggest shock of my life. On the front page of the newspaper, there was in large print a note that read, "After 18 years, the remains of Mrs. Helena Martin, the missing wife of the well-known businessman Ernesto Martin, are finally rescued." And below the press release, there was a photograph of the woman, who of course was exactly the same woman that I had taken in my cab that day, and who lived right in the house where I picked her up. Reading this made my blood run cold, and my coffee cup hit the floor. But that wasn't all. It turns out that the remains were found in a shallow grave in the woods adjacent to the Perimeter Avenue, right where I left her. On the next page you could see the photograph of the white dress, torn and ripped by time, and the red scarf, which so attracted my attention that night, and which is known to have been used for her burial. The note clarified that the crime was committed by her own husband, who after 18 years confessed that he committed the crime the same night she disappeared in 2000. Curiously, he suspected that she was cheating on him with a cab driver, and blinded by jealousy, he strangled her with his own scarf while she slept. Then he put her in the car and drove her to the place where he buried her.